Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to focus on the theme of hope in Of Mice and Men. If you were to get a question on hope in your exam, you could either think about how hope is presented through the characters or in key scenes. In this paragraph, I'm going to focus on hope in chapter 1 of Mice and Men, when we are first introduced to George and Lenny, and when they are talking about their dreams, their aspirations for the future. Remember, in your petal paragraphs, you need to focus on the evidence, how well you engage with that evidence, any techniques, your analysis of those techniques, and importantly, the context. Remember, context should not be a bolt-on. It shouldn't be an afterthought. You really need to link the context to the text and think about how and why Steinbeck is responding to the context through the power of his words. Okay, I'm going to read it through, but I will stop at parts to discuss it. John Steinbeck explores the theme of hope through George and Lenny and their dreams and aspirations. In the opening chapter, George states, "They ain't got nothing to look ahead to. With us, it ain't like that. We got a future. We got someone to talk to that gives a damn about us." Although these hopes for the future might be a way to appease Lenny, it still keeps their hope alive as they travel from ranch to seek work. So, although at the beginning when Lenny is saying, "Oh, tell me, George, tell me the dreams and hopes, what's it going to be like in the future?" we could say that George is like a father figure, and he's just almost telling us a story to Lenny as a way to appease him, to keep him happy, like you would tell a child a bedtime story. Even still though, he does still repeat this message, he still does have this goal and this dream, and maybe that's what keeps that alive at a time when they have very little to look forward to ultimately. He uses a declarative sentence, "They ain't got nothing to look forward to." So here the "they" is talking about other migrant workers and saying that they've got no hopes. What have they got to look forward to in the future? So in the green here is where I've linked this to the context. So he says this to perhaps illustrate how most migrant workers have no hopes for the future. In the 1930s and at the height of the Great Depression, thousands of people lost their jobs and were in financial crisis. As a result, many men became migrant workers, but this meant leaving their homes, potentially their families behind, in their hopes of finding employment. Migrant workers could travel miles with minimal possessions to seek work, and it was made all the more challenging and isolating by how lonely life would be. Since unemployment was so high, men had to compete to find work on ranches and thereby would travel alone. Okay, when I could go into more depth here in terms of the context, but I have mentioned the time phrase, I've mentioned about the Great Depression, what then that caused for people in terms of unemployment. If you think if there's so many people traveling to try and find work, then also you could put in here about the Dust Bowls and how that led to even less jobs. Men wouldn't travel together because then they might be competing with their companions. If they travel alone, then it removes that. So think about what a lonely life that they would lead. If you search migrant workers, put that into Google, you might see pictures of men where they're carrying a bag on their back, and that would be the only things that they possess. And how lonely a life that would be, how draining, how exhausting. Okay, so because men would generally travel alone, this is why the men in Soledad, so the men at the ranch when George and Lenny arrive there, they find it so unusual that George and Lenny travel together. Slim states that this might be because everybody in the whole damn world is scared of each other. Okay, notice how I've embedded another quotation here to again further reinforce a point that I've already made. The adjective scared signals the hostility between migrant workers who must contend for work, so in contrast, Slim almost seems in awe of Lenny and George's friendship. Okay, if you think about, especially when the men are first induced to the rest of the men on the ranch, how hostile it is. They don't seem to have much of a bond with one another. And that stems to how hostile that period would have been, when it was more so, I'd say, a dog-eat-dog society. Everyone is out for themselves, as opposed to working together and even having time to build those friendships. So Slim does seem to be in awe of Lenny and George having that, but it does set them apart from the rest of the migrant workers. It might even give Slim hope for companionship, which does seem to develop between him and George throughout the play. The more that we read, we see the bond that Slim and George do develop, and George does almost confess to Slim. He confides in him, and then at different stages through the course of the novel, Slim proves his loyalty to George. Okay, from there, perhaps George's friendship with Lenny leads him to believe that they are different, since he juxtaposes the third person pronoun they to the second person pronoun we. Okay, so he talks about the migrant workers as they, as if they're something separate to Lenny and George. And by doing that, he detaches them from that role as if they are different. He believes that they have a future, with foreshadows their goal of owning their own ranch and living off the fat of the land, their goal throughout the novel. Perhaps because of their unique bond, despite being migrant workers, George might feel that they are more likely to achieve their dream. Since George has somebody that gives a damn about him, he seems to feel more valued, and this gives him what he needs to motivate not only himself, but Lenny as well. He's not just doing this for him, but for Lenny. And maybe that bond and that friendship is what strives them and keeps their hopes and their dreams alive. So this part in the blue here, this is something to try and aim for thinking of being more critical, exploring the power of Steinbeck's words. And this is a piece of literature, what he might be trying to achieve. Okay, so by intertwining the theme of friendship alongside hopes and dreams in chapter 1, some of the very first themes that we're introduced to, perhaps Steinbeck himself is criticising the hostile nature of men who are competing for work, which then leads to a diminished sense of hope, not really looking forward to the future, and instead using his power to promote instead the value of companionship and loyalty, which we do see through George and Lenny. And it is very much Lenny that keeps the dreams alive. If you think structurally through the course of the novel, people's sense of hopes rises and dips. Someone like Candy, for example, just as he starts to develop his hopes and thinks that he could get work on a ranch with George and Lenny, have more freedom because he worries that he's going to be canned, then think about what happens later to completely diminish that dream. The same for multiple characters. You could argue that Lenny is perhaps the only one throughout the novel that always hangs on to his hopes and dreams. Maybe because he can't understand what is getting in the way of that. Still, the fact that he does have this hope, maybe that's what keeps it alive for George and potentially other characters on the ranch there as well.